Okay, so we are going to go over a contract, and the Columbus board has this lovely version. It's called an annotated version. So it's our contract, it's our board contract, and then it has in italics a description of every paragraph of like what goes into that paragraph, so that you can refer back to this at any time. And to find this, actually, Kristen is going to put it in .loop, but in the meantime, and another way to find it is to go to columbusrealtors.com. So Steve, if you want to go there.
I'm there.
And then hover over resources. And then you scroll down to forms and click on that. And this large black button says forms, contracts, and worksheets. We're going to click on that.
Okay.
And
Okay, it's right there.
you see that? Okay. And then you scroll down a little bit and there's a drop down arrow that says residential purchase contract. And there are a few forms in here. It's the second one down, annotated residential purchase contract. Oh yeah, you will have to possibly log in. And this is for teaching purposes. So, and I also have Courtney Horvath with me, who's going to help answer questions if you all have them. So feel free to either just speak up, take yourself off mute and speak up with your questions, or you can put them in chat and we'll read through them and answer your questions. So page 1 of our contract, simple yet important. And this can be done through .loop, and then it will flow over to all of the pages of your contract, is put in the address. It's required on the top of every page. Right? It's simple, but sometimes we forget. Okay. I'm going to jump to, I guess, the date. And the date that you fill in here is simply the date that you're writing the contract. It's not the date you go into contract, it's the date you're writing it. And then you go into kind of this first paragraph, and it's asking you to fill in the county and the parcel number. And you can see in italics, it's describing like, what do they mean by the parcel number? You have to be a little bit careful that there isn't more than one parcel. Don't get surprised. Like I have an example of a property I have listed in Canal Winchester, and it's one parcel, and you may have seen this.
I've looked at that one.
And when you pull it up on the auditor's site, for some strange reason, it has this tiny little sliver of land that you couldn't build anything on. I mean, you couldn't even walk on it. It's that skinny of a sliver, and it's a second parcel, and it goes with this property. So you just have to be careful. And my advice to you is always go to the auditor's site and do some research on the property.
So would you just list the one that's really more important there?
So
if you were doing that.
You want to get all of them in there.
Oh, okay.
And if it
that's why it has the S in parentheses. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. You want to get all of them in there, because when you put it on the contract, like that's truly what you're saying, I'm purchasing. And if you went to the closing table and you didn't get a second piece you thought you were, that could be a real difficult situation. Hi, Kristen. Okay.
Hi.
So that's the first section. And then we get into purchase price. Obviously, this is the purchase price, and you write it in numeric form, and then you also write it out in words. Let's see.
Like a check.
Okay. Just like a check, like you're writing a check. Okay. And there's no little explanation for that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And then there's additional terms and conditions. This is a free-for-all, right? There's so many things that can go into additional terms and conditions. This is where you would put an escalation clause, an appraisal clause, any kind of clause that you can think of, any other contingency that you can think of that you need to use to protect your client. And at this point, I'd like to stop and show you something else. So especially because if you're newer, you may not even, you don't know what you don't know. Number one, get advice, right? From your coach, from Courtney, or from me, or from Tom, so that you know that you're protecting your client. But one place that you can go for reference is in .loop. And I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna go to a new tab, and I'm gonna log into .loop. And I'm gonna click on, actually I'm gonna make sure I'm on my own accounts. I'm going to click on templates. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look at these clauses. And there are a ton of them. But sometimes even, I've been selling real estate for a long time, but sometimes you just aren't thinking clearly. And sometimes I will go to these clauses and I will just scan through all of them. And I know that seems like overkill, but it's never overkill when you're protecting your clients, just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, right? Like, oh gosh, I forgot this is on a well. Maybe I need a clause about well water, or for sure, if it's a condominium, you want to put a condominium clause in so that you can gather the documents. Now, the contract's kind of changed now, but we'll go over that in a minute. So there are just tons of clauses in here that you can go through. And if you don't know what something means and you think you might need it, but you are not sure, then just ask. That's what we're here for. Steve, were you able to find the clauses?
Yeah, I'm on there now.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So that's where you go to find that. So this is what would go into additional terms and conditions. And if you need to protect your client on something and it's not in the clauses, we have to be very careful because we're not attorneys, right?
Right.
So we can't just really make things up and start writing language in there if you don't have, I guess, firm verification that it's a good idea. So those are usually Tom Trigg questions, right? If you need to write something else in, you're going to want to get some advice from him, and he can help you with the language. He's the contract guy. You can call me, but he's the real deal. Okay, next, attorney approval clause. So there are a lot of schools of thought here. So this is basically saying the buyer and the seller have a certain period of time to send this contract to their attorney for review. And it's a contingency. If their attorney says, this isn't right, they can back out of the contract. And this is for buyer and seller. So some people might think, well, I don't want this in here. I'm not going to fill it in because I don't want another contingency. But remember, this is always up to your client, and we are here to protect them. I advise that you put something in there because I think everyone should have the opportunity to send this to their own attorney for a second set of eyes. It's just nice peace of mind. So listing agents, when they see that, I'm going to say 90% of the time, don't bat an eye. They're like, that's fine. It's normal. They're probably not going to send it to their attorney anyway. But I think it's a good idea. You will have some that may say something about it, and they're like, we want you to remove that contingency, and then it's up to your client. Courtney, is there anything you would add to that section? Sound good?
You got it, good.
Got it? Okay. All right. Financing. Be sure that you read these and you don't accidentally have, this is what I see happening, and you accidentally have your client's initial that they're paying cash. Don't do that if they're not paying cash, right? So be sure that you're reading through your contract and you know exactly what you're having them sign. But 3.1 is if your client is paying cash, then they have so many days to deliver proof of funds, right?
One thing I'll add there is in dot loop, it automatically will put initials.
Yes.
You have to make sure you take them off, you're not just adding them.
I agree.
So like it'll put cash one and you gotta
They're
take it
trying
and
to
assign
help
it.
you get this quickly.
Yeah,
Right.
assign it to no one.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That,
I'll
okay.
go over that in my
And-
dot class
and if-
one.
Yay!
Can you guys hear Courtney when she has comments? Give me a thumbs up if you could hear her. Okay, good. And Kristen's doing a dot loop class a little bit later. Thanks, Kristen.
And she's
That's
gonna go
awesome.
over that.
And she will let you all know how to handle the initial piece through dot loop. That's awesome. Okay, 3.2, they're going to initial if they are financing, which is going to be the majority of our clients. Let's see. I hate just reading this all to you. That's why I'm kind of scanning this. And you all know that's, well, and it addresses it in 3.2. This is where you're going to insert initials and you're going to decide if you already have their pre-qualification letter or if you need some time to get it. In this market, obviously, we always advise that you have that pre-qual letter in hand before you're even looking at homes because things are just moving too quickly to wait. The one thing that you do need to be aware of is that, let's see, a lender's pre-qualification letter stating that the buyer's credit report has been reviewed and that the buyer is pre-qualified to obtain a loan sufficient to finance the purchase of the property, which to me means it's property specific. So you may need to go back and get a property specific one. So keep that in mind. There are a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross when you're working through contracts. So make sure it's not a generic, it's a property specific. Many listing agents are not going to dot their I's and cross their T's and even check for that, but I think you should be a step ahead of them and do it. It's just a good practice. Loan application. So this is, after they go into contract, how quickly are your buyers going to apply for their full loan application? So this is where that date goes. And in today's market, you want that to be short, but make sure you talk to your client and the lender that they both have availability to get it done in a quick fashion before you commit to something for them. And then you're going to put in the type of loan, conventional, FHA, VA, or USDA. Is there anything, Courtney, that's not covered in there? Would you ever have a different type of loan?
If you're in a portfolio, but that's still conventional.
Conventional. Okay, so that should cover it. If for any reason you don't know what type of loan, you need to ask, because this does need to be in the contract. So you'll ask their lender.
And it should say it on the pre-approval letter.
What do you mean by portfolio?
We can talk about that later if you want to, but it's just a different type of conventional loan. So like, for instance, a condo association, they might not accept, it's basically trying to get the best way to explain this.
A portfolio loan is one that a bank or a company is going to hold in-house,
Yes.
and they're not selling it to Fannie and Freddie on the
Okay.
open market. So sometimes a portfolio loan is one that the bank is taking on a little bit more risk with your client, but they're okay with it because they've done their due diligence and they want to take on,
Yes.
usually
Okay.
that's what it is,
Yeah.
and they hold it in-house. Okay, so now we are at, so my other piece of advice to all of you, especially if you're new, I know we have varying levels of experience on the call and in the room, just read this contract, read it. I can't say it enough. Read it, and understand it. And if there's anything that's a little bit unclear to you, just ask, because this is our business. Like, this is our document. So we need to know it inside and out. 3.2C, this is where your buyer's lender is going to provide an actual document of a loan commitment. So you're going to fill in the blank of how long it's going to take that lender or bank to provide a loan commitment. And this should be provided to then the seller's agent when you receive it. Like, this is a check mark, like you should be following through your dates and deadlines of the contract. And this is one point where you take some action, right? You have to make sure we get the loan commitment in the right amount of time. Typically, a bank can produce these for sure within 30 days, unless there's something tricky about it. And that's where you just need to have a lot of conversation with your lender. And I may even ask them, like, okay, how quickly do you think you can do a loan commitment? How quickly can you close? So I know that up front before I even write the offer. Sometimes they can do it as quick as like 20 days, but you certainly want to get their blessing before you commit their time in there that quickly. And then don't forget, I see this all the time too, don't forget to look at a calendar when you are writing out a contract, because you're putting dates in. You want to make sure the dates shouldn't really fall on a weekend. They can, but it's easier if they don't. And you want to make sure they all fall in line. Like, don't make your loan commitment after your closing date. I've totally seen that before. Okay. Appraisal contingency. This is a big one right now. So I'm actually just going to read this and then we're going to talk about it. If the property is appraised or otherwise valued for loan purposes for less than the purchase price stated herein, the buyer shall have the right to terminate this contract by written notice to the seller or seller's broker, delivered within 5 calendar days after the buyer receives a copy of the appraisal or other documentation evidencing the lender's determination of value. So many times when you're writing an offer, this is going to be a question from your buyer, like, what if it doesn't appraise? What do we do? you're going to want to go to this contingency and show them that they're actually protected with the standard language that's in our contract. If it doesn't appraise, they do have the opportunity to just simply walk away, and they should get their earnest money back. And we'll talk about that in a minute, why I say should.
I'm assuming this is a part of these offers coming in higher than listing price too.
Yeah.
That's what I would assume.
Yeah. So you are seeing, let's say the house is listed for 200,000. You're offering 220, which we're seeing this all the time right now. You know, they're still protected by this. And then you're going to find pressure from the listing agent to say, well, will you bridge the appraisal gap?
Right.
And what that means is, will your buyer commit to bringing X amount of dollars to closing to bridge any gap between the appraised price and the purchase price? And that is solely up to your client if they feel comfortable with it. I just ran into this last weekend, and my particular client did not feel comfortable bridging that appraisal gap, but we did go significantly over asking price. We did not get the house. It is just the way of the market today. I'm not suggesting that your buyers do it, but if it's a lever they can pull, it's going to make their offer much stronger.
This may be obvious, but is that because somebody else was willing to do? Okay.
Likely. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure.
Or if the seller thought, well, we got somebody that can. Yeah, right.
Yeah. It gives that seller such peace of mind because they know we're in a quirky market and that it might not appraise, because if you think about it, prices are still going up, right? So everything's still appreciating. Appraisers typically lag just behind the market, right? Because they're using the past sold comps. So it's a process. And we see a lot of cut appraisals. We call them cut appraisals when it comes in below the asking price or the purchase price, the contract price. So anyway, that's a lot on that. Any questions about appraisals?
Okay, I'm sorry, I keep asking questions.
No, go for it.
Do they often come in fairly close to the asking price, not necessarily the offered price?
So I will tell you, traditionally speaking, you will find that appraisals come in at the actual offer price more times than not, because the appraiser gets a copy of the purchase contract, and they do. They get a copy of the purchase contract, they review it, they see the MLS, they kind of know everything that's happening. And so more times than not, in a more normal market, they do come in right at that offer price. But if there's somebody that's just offering way over, you know, they're going to do their due diligence and they're going to put it at what they feel is the right market value on that appraisal. Yep. Good questions. Okay. Demand 3.3, demand for financing evidence. Basically, the seller can request evidence of financing, and we have to provide that proof to them, right? And we're really doing that through the pre-qualification and the loan commitment. Those are the two documents that you want to stay on top of. Oh, this is saying, I apologize. This is in the appraisal section, that they can, I'm making sure I'm saying this correctly. They may also, I don't know if that's what it's saying or not. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph. Sorry. But they can demand to see proof of the actual funds that they're going to use to bridge an appraisal gap. And I would recommend that if you are representing a seller, or even when you're representing a buyer, you want to make sure they have the funds. Right. If they're going to say, yes, I can bring an extra $10,000 to closing, we need to make sure they have funds for their closing costs, their down payment, and an additional $10,000. So it's
find that out at the closing.
Right. You don't want to find that out when the money doesn't show up. Taxes and assessments. This is a big section. So taxes in the state of Ohio are paid in arrears. So there are points in time when we have almost a full year of taxes that have not yet been collected. So it gets a little funky. But what our contract says is at the time of closing, funds will be collected from the seller for the time that they have lived in the property up until the date of closing for taxes that have not been collected but will become due. And those funds are given to the buyer, right? So the buyer is going to see this credit on their settlement statement. Let's just say it's $4,000. What they need to remember is a little bit later down the road, either in January or June, they're going to get a tax bill. And they're going to sit and say, well, I didn't even own the house. Why am I paying this? They have to remember they were given the funds at closing. So they need to kind of stow that away so they can pay their tax bill. They're usually escrowing it anyway with their bank so it doesn't come up. But that's the mindset that they should have. Assessments. Most things are disclosed through the auditor and the county recorder. So it does help when you do a little bit of due diligence and dig in there to see if there's anything else. It does state in our contract that if there's any assessment against this property, that the seller is going to make it current at closing. So you want to kind of do a little digging, and they're so rare, and this is why this gets missed sometimes. That we forget as listing agents to do this, or even buyer agents to find out if this stuff exists, but the onus will fall on the seller and they're going to be required. I had it happen once in Ballantrae. I don't know if you're familiar with that subdivision. It's in Hilliard, Dublin Hilliard. And they had like the big drainage assessment. Like they must've put in like new drainage systems in the community, and they were assessed a few $100s over time. And all of a sudden this was on our settlement statement and we were all a little bit blindsided. So I say shame on me for not looking that up, right? I should have found that. And the seller kind of should have known too, but what's that?
That would be on the auditor's website. That.
I think that one was on the recorder's website. So you kind of have to dig a little deeper, right? Yeah. Okay. What is next? Community development charge. So this is rarely a thing, but it's becoming a little bit more of a thing as new developments go in and they have these TIFs and extra assessments to help fund the development. I know this is getting probably over everyone's head. I will tell you, if you're selling anything in New Albany, you're probably going to have this. This is also on the auditor site where you can find out, and you have to fill this in. There's like this, there's a 100-year community development assessment in New Albany. And in my opinion, this is why New Albany has a bad rap for having high taxes. They have high taxes because they have high property values because they have big houses. But they also have this 100-year assessment over the whole community. And it's actually not that much in the scheme of things. Like the amount isn't that much. But if you look at the auditor, it is rolled into their taxes. So what they're seeing on the auditor side is the whole fee. But there's like this huge breakdown, and there is a volume and page number that you have to plug in here if you're in. And a lot of times it should be disclosed by the listing agent. But if you're working with someone that's not experienced, they might not know to do that. But I can tell you, and I can't think of any other community that has it. Okay, so again, this is rare, but for New Albany, you need to know that. Okay, 4.3. It's just saying there are no other assessments against the property to the seller's knowledge unless that's filled in. Okay, number 5, fixtures and equipment. So thankfully, the attorneys that put this contract together for us, this is a relatively recent addition where they've listed all of these things. So basically, if something is affixed to the home, it should stay, but cross-reference this list. If there's something in the property that's not on this list, you do want to address it. And you want to have so as a buyer's agent, you want to get really good at when you walk through a property and your buyers are starting to like it, you need to take a mental note or real notes of some things that might be in question. And a good example of it is a TV and a TV mount, right? Like behind me that's hung. So what do we want to do with that? A lot of people don't want to leave their televisions, right? Because they're expensive, so they take them with them. But do they leave the mount, or do they leave a gaping hole in the wall? like these things need to be addressed. And if it's something that's important to your buyer, you need to talk about it up front. Some buyers are super easy and they're like, we'll patch and paint it because we're going to put a TV up anyway. But some are going to be very meticulous and they may say, I want that mount to stay. I'm going to get a TV that will fit it. I don't want to have to deal with anything else. So you want to address that. Another thing that comes up I guess this would probably go in additional terms and conditions. If you find a home is a little bit dirty, you can't expect that to be clean on the day of closing. Like you have to think of these human issues that you're going to run into. Not everybody lives the same way. So you can, you could certainly write in that it should be professionally cleaned. I've seen people write in that it should be broom clean, whatever that means. Anyway, I'm just thinking of issues that you're going to run into. Okay, if there's anything on the property that your buyer would like excluded, you want to enter it right here. Like if you're in the backyard and you see this old rusty grill, you cannot assume that they're going to dispose of that before closing. You may have to write that in if you want it removed, right? Have you run into this stuff? Or like a big pile of wood that's like rotting?
I mean, it says in the contract they're supposed to get rid of all debris.
Yeah, but they don't.
They don't.
And so it's good to have that conversation because sometimes to a seller, they're like, well, that's just how it is. They're used to seeing it. So they don't even think it's a big deal. They're not doing things maliciously. It's just how they live.
One thing that's pretty common when I see is swing sets. Do you want it or do you don't?
Swing
if you don't
sets.
want it, that's pain to move. And the seller assumes or doesn't assume it stays. So I kind of put that in both
That's
spots.
a good piece
Or
of
a hot
advice.
tub. Someone might want the hot tub. Someone
Hot
might not.
tubs, swing sets, always address them. Do they want them? Do they not want them? And get it in writing. So someone's not stuck with it.
Sheds.
And I'm
Shed.
assuming a shed would stay.
Don't assume it because I've
Well,
had a
we
hairy
should talk about it,
situation.
Right? Address it. Anything
Address
you
it.
can think of, address it. And I know it seems overkill and you feel like you're making things more complicated, but learn from people that have a lot of experience. When you have to deal with the alternative, it's not worth it because then I literally have almost had like a deal breakup over a swing set. It has happened. They get in a big, huge fight over a $300 swing set and
And a shed. I've had that.
or
with
a
a
shed. Yeah. Your job is to try to think of problems before they happen. Right?
Mhm.
I've seen big mirrors on the wall that almost look like an antique item and
Mirrors.
and then I could see the buyer saying, "Oh, that'll be here. That's great."
And on the flip side, as a seller,
Mhm.
when I do my listing presentation or sign the paperwork, I tell them, because for example, I had a seller once that had this gorgeous antique hanging light chandelier over their table and they want to keep it, right? So we address it ahead of time, but I say, get it out of here. Just get it changed before we even start showing. So that way it's not an issue. Or someone's like, no, I really want that. And it's attached to the house and
Yeah.
try and get, if there's a special rod, I'm like, if it's something, just get it out of here.
An issue that I had come up on someone's contract recently were window coverings. What does that mean? Address it, right? Because I kept looking up definitions and a lot of it included the actual drapes. So some people might think it's only blinds and rods, but some people are going to think it's drapes. So you have to know that there are 3 different components we're talking about and to address them all separately and clearly.
One other thing you want to put in there, garage door openers.
Garage door openers. And I will tell you, I'm a culprit of that. I don't remember to put that in
I
there.
don't either.
You may request 2 garage door openers. We laugh because Courtney ran into an issue recently with garage door openers. It's funny what people can get really upset about. Yeah, you have to be careful. Okay, on to inspections and tests. So this is where you're going to put the number of days in that you will need to do all of the inspections and tests that your buyer would like to do on the property. And I know we're getting into a situation now, the market's moving so quickly and sometimes people aren't doing inspections at all. I really don't advise that. I have rarely ever had a client not do an inspection, but that's just me. I'm a conservative human being. And unless they're like a construction person and have built houses or they're an inspector and they know a whole lot about houses, I really think they should have an inspection because you would be surprised at what you'll uncover once you move into a house. Not everything is on the surface, but again, it's their decision. If they choose to not do an inspection, you must get a hold harmless signed so that they see another layer of risk that they are taking on in black and white. That's the whole point of that. I mean, of course, it's to relieve you of liability, right? But really what I feel is it's giving them another minute to think about it. Like, wow, you're putting another piece of paper I have to sign off on so that I know that this is risk that I'm taking on. So anyway, be sure that you do that. It's in .loop, the hold harmless. But as far as inspections and tests, right, they can inspect anything they want. Very commonly, we do full home inspections. We do radon tests. We do pest inspections, which includes termites and all other kinds of little pests that can cause problems for homes. People will ask, well, should I have a mold test done or should I have a lead-based paint test done? Those are much more rare, but they certainly are welcome to, especially if they have any health concerns with their family. Usually for a mold test, an inspector is going to go in, and if they flag something that says, you know what, you might want to get a second opinion on this, then you might have your mold person come in after. That's what I see happen most commonly. Radon, you want to refer them to the EPA website so they can educate themselves about it to see if they do have a concern. One thing I like to point out to my buyers is, you know, it might not be a concern for you, but realize when you go to sell the property, the likelihood of that buyer being concerned is high. We have high radon in our area. And the farther east you go, the higher it seems to be. It's interesting. Licking County, I think, is one of the highest radon areas in the country. I don't know why, it just is shale. I think it comes from shale in the ground. So a lot to talk to with your clients in this section, right? So that they can feel really comfortable with this home purchase.
Okay, I have a question.
Go for it.
On your inspectors, have you done that where you found people you're more comfortable with?
Yes. So that's another really good point. When as a licensed realtor, there's some liability on you when you're referring people, right? When you're referring people to do these extra services for your client. So you want to refer 3 inspectors every time and 3 lenders every time. Other services, I think our broker policy says it's okay if you do 2, but the big ones you want to do 3. If you don't have an inspector, you're like, well, I don't know anyone, I'm new. Get on our Facebook page, the closed group, and ask. Our seasoned agents are happy to share with you those people that they're having great experiences with. Our closed Facebook page is such a resource because you have literally probably hundreds of years of experience sitting right there that are ready to help. Okay. Remedy period, another really fun topic. So this is the blank that you're going to fill in on how many days you will have to negotiate repairs. It's not for the seller to complete the repairs. It's just your negotiation period. So be very conscious that your request to remedy has to be put in writing to the seller's agents within the inspection period, not within the remedy period. It's within the inspection period. If it happens after that, they don't have to even look at it. Like, just read the details in this contract so you know exactly what these dates and deadlines mean. But that's an important one. So it's basically a whole nother negotiation, right? During this remedy period, you get your inspection report back, you read through it, your buyer reads through it, you ask them, you know, what's most important to you? Is anything of concern that we'd like to ask the seller to repair? And then the question comes in, you know, when I write my request to remedy, do they repair it before closing? Do they simply pay the contractor and then it happens after closing? Or can they give us a credit? We just want money off the purchase price. Like, all of these things can be negotiated, but the one thing to remember is the buyer and seller are not allowed to exchange money that's outside of this closing. They can't, the seller can't just simply give the buyer money. That is mortgage fraud. So it's the onus falls on your buyer, right? Because they are at closing asked a question. Have you exchanged anything that's not disclosed on the settlement statement? And they have to be able to answer that honestly. So there are agents out there in the world that are going to tell you that it's okay. It is not okay. I'm telling you that right now. Ask any attorney in town. They will confirm that for you. But Guess what they can pay? A seller can pay closing costs for a buyer. So maybe that is, enough for the buyer to say, okay, they pay my closing costs, and after closing, I'm going to go ahead and pay for these repairs.
So that coming in during that negotiation, right?
That can happen during the request to remedy, but then you're changing your original contract, so your paperwork will have to follow, but that's easy, right? We'll teach you how to do that. Anything else in the request to remedy?
Hey, Kris, I have a
Tondo.
question.
Yeah, go for it.
I get a little confused with with the market the way it is with the remedy period and not, you know, having an inspection, but not, having them do repairs, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And how that works. So the way what I'm hearing is the way the contract is written, the way, just the way it is. And if you just put dates in there, what does that say? Does that say we're going to have an inspection? Do you have to clarify that? Like right now, I'm about to sign a counteroffer on a property, and it's a cash property, and we're going to have an inspection, but there's not going to be any remedies. But there's no as is written in the contract or whatever. So just the way it's written, you know what I'm saying? Like, what does that mean, and what extra do you have to put in there? Or if I'm about to list another property, if they don't want remedies, do I have to specify that? So I'm just a little confused about the inspection period and what's automatically happens and what you have to clarify. Does that make sense?
A little bit. So if you put, I think to address your first question, like you put a date in for the inspection, so you're doing that, but you don't have a date in for your remedies, which is saying you are taking it as is. You're not going to request remedies. So within that inspection period, let's say it's 10 days. Within that time frame, you need to get your inspections done and decide if you're moving forward with the purchase and letting them know in writing. So if you want to get out of the contract, it has to happen within that 10 days. But you are stating, I'm not going to ask them for repairs. Now, you will find in this market, and in any market, even if you don't put a remedy in, sometimes people will still ask for a remedy. Anything goes. It doesn't mean the seller has to even consider it, because obviously you've put forth a contract that says that you wouldn't. So they could simply say, no, sorry, see you later. I'm going to go to my next buyer. Does that help answer it? What other question do you have surrounding that, Tonda?
Yeah, does it just, so the way the contract's written, if you put the dates in there, then before this crazy market, then it would be, okay, you have 10 days to get an inspection and present remedies, and they have so many days to do the remedies. Is that how that works?
You have so many days to negotiate the remedies.
Okay.
And then within that negotiation, you're going to clarify, are the remedies going to happen? Are the repairs going to happen prior to closing, or something else? And that would all have to be disclosed in writing, either in your request to remedy. Sometimes it happens there, and sometimes you have an addendum to your contract that can iron things out there.
And is that where the request to remedy is? Is it an addendum
It is
initially?
not. It's its own form. So if you go into
Okay.
.loop, just search on request, just put in the word request and it'll pop up. There's a request to remedy form, and then there's a seller's response to the request to remedy. There are those two forms that you can use. And if you end up going back and forth a couple of times, I just reuse one of those blank forms, right? And you might say, this is the second response.
Yeah, that totally clears it up. I get it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good.
A lot of the listings today say on there that we're not doing anything.
Yes.
If you look in the agent to agent column,
It already says as is.
yeah.
And
as
if
is,
that's
we're
the
not doing
case, to write a strong offer for that particular seller, you'll probably want to write in, buyer will take this as is. Just be careful to clarify that you have the right to terminate, right? You have the right to have your inspections and the right to terminate. Is there a clause that says that? 6.4. I know Tom gets.
He doesn't like us to put 0.
Exactly, because he
there.
feels like it waives that part of the contract.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying you want to clarify that you have the right to terminate. That goes in your additional terms and conditions.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. Now let's talk about this lovely new section for condominiums. This is entirely new, just came out over the last couple of months, because I think there has been a lot of litigation around condominiums. Buyers go into it unknowing of all of the rules and maybe even the condition of the finances of the community. So all of these different things can happen, and there's probably been lawsuits. So the attorneys that support the Columbus Realtors have gotten together to say, okay, if we do all of this legwork up front, this is going to provide the buyer the information they need to make a good informed decision about purchasing this property. But I will tell you, this is a lot of stuff, and it's very difficult to gather as a listing agent. So be prepared when you're taking a condo listing. This is tough. And if you list a condo and you receive this contract with 6.5 in there, you want to make sure you meet those terms and conditions of this contract, or you need to do a counteroffer or an addendum to this contract to say, I don't have these things, and that it's in black and white and clear, because they're requesting it, right? They're requesting it. If you signed off on it, that means you're doing it. You will find the smaller condominium complex, sometimes they don't have this information, right? They don't even keep that close a track of what's happening. The big ones do. They have management companies. And then you have to deal with how much time does it take to gather all of this information, because the management companies are busy. And are they going to charge me for this information? They're way jumping on board with that. There are companies that are housing these documents, but you have to pay to get in there and get them. So then you need to talk to your seller, like, am I paying this as the realtor? Are you paying this? And these are all conversations that need to happen. So there's no one perfect answer. It's just,
I showed a condo to a buyer, and there's no HOA is what it said online.
Wow.
When I called the agent, they were like, so I asked for deed restrictions, so they sent me those.
Okay.
Because it's one building with 6 condos, but there's no thing to set up for the roof or that.
Wow.
So my buyer was like, no. And I'm like, yeah, this is
That
crazy.
does make it interesting. And it's good that your buyer found that out early so they can decide for themselves if they want to tackle that. Like, what if the roof does start to go bad and then your 5 neighbors don't want to pitch in? Yikes. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
There's no condo fee, no monthly fee.
Right. There's the benefit,
Yeah,
right? No
right.
condo fee, but the whole
But
place could cave in on us
It
now.
was bad.
Was it really?
It did. The lawn needed done, the building needed painted. It was not a good vibe.
I will tell you,
I mean, I let
HOAs
him
are
be
in
that.
place
That's
for a
his
reason.
calling.
Yeah. Yeah. You have that one, right? In Worthington, that complex where there's no HOA fees, and it's rough,
Where's that?
rough around the edges.
It's a multifamily, there's 4 units, it's in Worthington.
Oh, okay.
So they own the whole building, but then you can, like, the outside, they have to mow around theirs. But some of the other ones don't take care of them.
Well, the one I thought I saw yours online, it looks real nice outside there.
I'm a good photographer.
I love it.
It closes tomorrow,
That's
so
what
we're
matters.
good.
That's a 4
Yeah,
unit, right?
yeah,
It's a good cash flowing property.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, 6.5B, that's going to just go over the time period that your buyer has to review all of these documents that the seller's providing. So again, read this stuff in detail so that you know how to support your buyer. Warranties. So this is a totally optional item, right? If your buyer wants to request a warranty, this is stating that they can put the amount in, they can put the company in, and they're asking the seller to purchase that for them at closing. Look in the MLS first. Many homes have a warranty already in place, and it would be disclosed there. So if you have that, but you don't know which warranty is in place, I have personally put in the additional terms and conditions simply for that warranty to convey that's been advertised. As long as your buyer is okay with that, right? Without even knowing who it is or what the coverage is. They're usually similar. So you can do that, or just call the listing agent and say, which company is that? And then you fill in the blanks. Pretty easy. The deed section says that the deed will convey a marketable title. So you can read through the details of that. Then it talks about mineral rights. So we're not going to dive deep into this, but if you're selling rural properties, I recommend that you get, I guess this would be more if you're the listing agent, not so much writing the contract, but I would contact your title agency early and upfront so that they can start doing a title search to make sure all of the mineral rights are intact and do convey with the property. Because if something happened like 70 years ago, it gets real hairy. And there's a whole long process an expensive process that your seller might have to go through. I've had the joy of dealing with that too. Title.
Sorry, Kris, it's
Yeah, go
Tanya.
ahead.
I have one other question. So with warranties, this may be a stupid question.
Mm-mm.
Do you only have a certain time frame to purchase a warranty yourself? Like if you buy a property and you want to get a warranty, do you have to do it in a certain time frame of purchasing it, or can you like do that at any time?
You can do it at any time. It's just like any other insurance. I mean, to be, to make sure that you're fully covered, I would do it the day of closing so that there isn't any time that you're not covered, right? That would be my recommendation.
Okay, great. And I did type a question, but you kind of touched on it, and I was just curious. The title agency does the search for liens and mortgage info, but is that something that we should be doing as well? If your client expresses like they don't know how much they owe, like there might have been a situation where they got into trouble and had to do like, I forget what they call that, not an adjustment, but like a contingency that to their loan or something, so they don't know exactly what they owe, or if they have liens. Is there a way for us to find that out, or is that is only the title agency the ones that can do that?
Yeah, the title agency is the only one that's going to be able to do that because to get with a lender, they're not going to disclose private information about a client. You know what I mean? About someone's mortgage. So either they have to call themselves or a title agency can call and get payoff information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so in our contract, it is the seller that's going to be purchasing the title insurance and providing that to the buyer. And they're also required within 15 days prior to closing, providing a title commitment to the buyer. So the title agency is doing all of their work. They put together a title commitment. They're going to email it to you as the buyer's agent. So this is another checkbox for you. You want to make sure you're following up at least 15 days prior to closing to make sure you have this and your buyer has the opportunity to review it. I will never profess to be really good at reviewing these documents. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a title agent. So if there are questions, I typically will connect my buyer with the title agency so that they can discuss any issues or concerns that they have with that commitment. And title commitments are expensive, or title insurance is expensive. So when you're representing a seller, that's why it's nice to do net sheets for them so that they know that that's another big fee that comes along with selling a property. Okay, that's more about title commitment. Let's see, utility charges, condominium charges, interest, rentals, and security. They kind of throw a whole lot of things in here. So the seller is responsible for paying utility charges up through the date of closing. The one to be concerned with really more is water than anything else, because water bills stay with the property. The rest of the utilities follow people. I don't know if anyone knew that. So that's the only one that tends to get a little bit sticky sometimes. If a seller leaves and doesn't do a final payment, it kind of your buyer gets harassed a little bit. So you have to work that out. It doesn't happen often because the title agency gets involved and they make sure that things get paid up, but sometimes it gets missed. So that's one. If you want to do like an extra level of service with your buyer, maybe follow up with you know what I mean, on that water bill and just do that due diligence for them to make sure it's done.
Landlords pay the water and then include it in the rent.
Oh.
Because the gas and electric go with the tenant, the water doesn't. It stays with it.
And so they want to make sure it's paid as a landlord and then just pass that cost on to the buyer. That makes sense. Yeah.
That's what I do.
So they can keep a good eye on it. Okay. Adjustments are made for mortgage interest. So basically, the title agency is following up on all of these different things, and they make sure that they're trued up at the date of closing. So the title agency handles a lot of this stuff for us. Security deposits are transferred to a buyer if it's a rental property. That's something that you do want to put in writing and have all of that documented. And investment properties is kind of a whole nother class. We won't go into that today. A homeowner association dues and fees. The title agency also reaches out to them, and they make sure all the monies are prorated, to the seller and buyer for the time that each have owned it. So that again gets trued up at closing. Damage or destruction of the premises. This talks about what happens if we're in contract and like a tornado whips through and takes everything out, or a fire occurs, or something drastic happens. This is talking about exactly how we walk through that. Everything needs to be put in writing. The onus is on the seller to notify the buyer, and they work through that process together. So make sure you read this. It is rare, but it does happen. Earnest money, another lovely topic that is probably the most litigated issue in this contract. It's no fun. So a lot of attorneys that I have talked to over time, they kind of recommend that you don't even do it because it's just kind of a pain, but it sometimes is a necessary evil. If you're representing a buyer and you need to write a very strong contract, then I would say I would recommend that they put up earnest money, because it shows that seller how serious they are about this property, that I will risk X amount of dollars to show you how interested I am. I found that we're kind of loose in Central Ohio when it comes to earnest money amounts. I see $500, $1,000, maybe $2,000. Other areas of the country, they are much higher, right? It's at least 1% of the purchase price, or it's, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. I've seen all kinds of things in other parts, but we're a little bit loose about it. So if I had a $200,000 property and someone offered $1,000 earnest money, that would feel normal around here. And then you get to decide, you and your buyer, if you want to deposit the money right at contract, right within 3 days, or if you want to wait until after the inspection period to make sure that the buyer really wants, is okay with the condition of the property, and then they put the money up. Earnest money can be held by many different places. Traditionally, it's held by us, right? By our brokerage. And there's a process with Kristen that you go through to make sure that's deposited. And then you have to pull that money back out prior to closing to give that back to them. But earnest money can also be held by a title agency. And it kind of takes that extra process out of there, and they can handle it. So that's something to think about. We don't really have an opinion on what's better. I don't think it matters, really. Okay, so let's talk about earnest money and maybe the reasons why attorneys don't like it. So in order for earnest money, let's say the deal does fall apart. In order for earnest money to be returned to a buyer, both parties have to sign off on a document, or we legally, or the title agency is not legally allowed to pull that money back out. We have to have a mutual release document that allows the money to be cut back to the buyer. So if for whatever reason they're in some kind of conflict and they're not agreeing, and that seller doesn't sign off, that money sits there. And it sits there for up to 2 years. And if there's no litigation, then it goes back to the buyer, or it goes into unclaimed funds for the state. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. I've only had that happen like twice. You had that happen? You're lucky. Okay, this all
So in a sense, it's simpler without it then.
It's much simpler
If
without
everyone's
it.
happy with that, right?
If everyone is okay with it, you can skim right past that.
Because I have a property somebody wants to see, and it says there's $1,000 required with it.
Required, interesting. I haven't seen very many people do that.
And it's not a real expensive property.
Okay, my guess is that seller has been burnt in the past
Yeah, right.
with someone walking away for no reason. Okay. This, you can see that section 12, it's all about earnest money. So be sure to read through that and understand how it's moved about. Let's see. A lot of this is kind of miscellaneous that I think you can read through 13 on your own time. I don't know that there's anything. 13.7 talks about foreign investments. So just know that if you have someone that is bringing money in from outside of the United States, it does cause usually a longer closing. Like a lot of things have to happen. And your lender is going to help walk you through that. Or the title agency if it's cash. Notices to all parties. We always advise that they have legal representation. Don't just skim over that. It's a big deal that we recommend that to our clients, and that we do not discriminate. It is a really big deal. Property disclosure. This states that the buyer will receive a property disclosure from the seller. It's a really important form. You talk to any attorney and they will say if there's ever a dispute over a property, that is the form that they go to first. And that's what they are reviewing as attorneys. So if you're representing a seller, I always say, if you know of anything, over disclose. There's nothing wrong with it. It actually builds trust between you and your buyer. Ohio sex offender registration, it's up to the buyer to do their own research on this. Concessions, can read through that. Okay, closing and possession. So this is where you're going to identify the closing date. And I guess the discussion that we might have here is possession, right? Closing may happen one day and possession may happen after that. And there are things to discuss, the pros and cons with the buyers and sellers about that. So you're representing the buyer here if you're writing the contract. So if the seller has possession after closing, then you have to kind of address, okay, what if something happens to the property after? The good thing is the buyer buys, they're going to have full-blown homeowners insurance, so they're covered there. But I always recommend that the seller, if they're staying there for a duration of time, that they carry renter's insurance, right? Because if something were to happen to the property, their belongings would no longer be covered anywhere unless they did that. So it's important to both parties. Final verification of condition. This is your final walkthrough. So you want to use this time to walk through with your buyers. Number one, to make sure the condition is still the same. Number two, you might check through the repairs if you've asked them to do repairs, and you kind of walk through and make sure those happened. And then possession, we talked a little bit about that.
What kind of time frame do you normally put on something like that?
For final walkthrough?
Yeah.
You like the default of 2 days is usually sufficient. Okay. So either a day or two before closing, you could go in, or if you want to go in, like,
you don't want to be too early.
You don't want to be too early because they're probably still moving out. And what if, something happens? There's always that risk when you're buying a house. Like, these discussions are going to come up. Like, what if you do your final walkthrough, but they're not moving until the day of closing? Then they have movers in and out and boxes and furniture, and they could scuff the walls. So, I mean, the good news is usually things don't happen, or it's minor and the buyer's like, all right, I get it. I'll patch and paint the wall. Or the movers typically carry insurance, and you might have to get them to step in to repair something. So our job never ends. Really. Now, I will say, I have talked to attorneys and they say your fiduciary responsibility is over at closing. And some attorneys would tell you to give no more advice after closing, right? You're done. But that's an attorney speaking. And we usually don't do that because we're realtors. We're different.
Trying to build a network here.
Right? We love our clients and we always want to help them. So just be careful with the advice you're giving after closing. Then this is, somebody had mentioned the debris and personal property. This does say, right, that the debris and personal property should be removed, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And then don't forget to put the duration of your offer. How long is this offer good for, right? And some people say, well, what's the standard time? There is no standard. If there were a perfectly balanced market, you'd probably give someone at least 24 hours. We're not in a perfectly balanced market. So typically we're doing exactly what the seller's asking us to do as buyer agents. It's like if they want 3 days and we're giving them 3 days because because we're kind of bending over backwards for the seller right now. It isn't always that way. You know, sometimes we need to put pressure on the sellers. So it just depends on your situation, on how long you would leave that open. And then on the signature page, don't forget to fill out the information. You want signature, print their name, date signed. That all happens through .loop. That's fine. Typically, people are not filling in attorneys, so you don't necessarily have to do that. You can if you want, but it does need brokerage and it does need agent information. You don't need fax numbers. We don't even have one. You don't necessarily have to have in-office phone numbers. You can skip that, but you want the brokerage name, the brokerage license number, the MLS office ID. If you don't know where that's at, it's the listing agent's information and brokerage information is in the MLS. You can always pull it off the listing. Our information is, pull up an old listing for ours, it's in there. Pull yourself up in the
Would
MLS.
.loop fill in some of that?
You can have it in .loop and it will autofill for you. And it's on our closed group Facebook page. It's pinned at the top, important numbers. So if
Oh,
you
yeah, I have that.
need the information, it's all over the place. And that is the contract. Anyone have any other questions? Anything you would add?
No, you did a good job.
All right.
So
Wow.
I have one question with the contract, like time frame or whatever. You put a day. Does it default to a specific time, or do you need to put the time and day in there? Like, you know, so like the offer's good through September 24th at 11 a.m. or do you just put just September 24th? You know what I mean? Like, what's customary with that?
So you can do either. I like to put a time in because if not, it means 11:59 that night, and nobody really
Okay.
wants to be that late.
Right. Okay. So it does default to basically 11:59 if you don't put a time in.
That's exactly it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat. I don't even see the chat. So
So I was just asking her,
yeah.
the earnest money, the earnest money deposit receipt, 12.2. So usually nobody's signing that they've received it. So what are they supposed to be doing? She said that there's a form in there. Nobody's,
Yes. So when it comes to earnest money, you do want something documented that you have received it and you're depositing it with your brokerage. So you can use the section in the contract. It's a little box and you fill it out with the check number and you put a signature on there, right? And the amounts. And that can be your documentation that yes, earnest money has been accepted. Or there's a form in .loop that can also be used that kind of signs off. And that's what you want to send that to the listing agent to say, yep, check. We've done this part of our contract. We have fulfilled our obligation to collect the earnest money.
Yeah, and you don't send that till you've actually collected it.
Yes, that's key. Make sure you collect it first. Yeah, does that answer your question?
yeah, nobody does it.
Okay,
They're just handing me checks. So that's not happening.
okay. So we probably need to work on that a little bit.
I didn't know that that was like a part of the contract, that needs to be signed.
It is.
I mean, I knew it, but I didn't like know what it was.
Yeah,
So I'm just people are here just handing me checks right now.
good observation.
Well, you wouldn't have to sign it. They would sign it that it's been collected.
Right, but they're not.
It's not happening
It's
ever.
not happening.
So
They're
what
just-
I do, I cross out the check number and I just send them the check.
Yeah. And other agents may be doing that. They might be emailing a copy of the
Uh-huh.
check,
Yeah,
which
that's
that
what
works.
that's what they're doing. But
Okay.
they're not doing like a formal form.
Which is
they're-
okay.
Either way, as long as
It's
they're
totally fine.
showing that it's been collected, it's fine.
Okay.
Yep, just proof of collection.
So there doesn't need to be an actual form that says they picked it up on such and such date and gave it to the office on such and such date.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, as long as there's just proof that it's been collected.
Okay, because that's what one of the agents was asking.
Okay. I would think, to me, the forms are better. It's a little bit more formal and efficient,
Yeah.
but As long as we're fulfilling
Right,
the
'cause they-
obligation, it's okay.
They give me the check and then I make a copy and put it in the loop and let them know. And then I'm
That's-
assuming they're sending it off
Yeah,
and letting.
That's
people
probably
see
what they're
it.
doing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
It is.
okay.
Yep. Good question.
Okay, that's all I had.
Anything else? Thank you all. I hope you learned a little bit today, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.